Okay, we're ready to go.
Are we? Okay. Make sure the mic's close enough. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, I hear you fine. Sound good?
Okay. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you again. This is Richard Sachs, your host on Lost Arts Radio. This is Lost Arts Radio Live. And this is a short show before the club meeting about some things that are going on in the world around us that I'm sure we're all paying attention to and trying to figure out. I feel a lot of the time like I'm in the middle of a science fiction movie. When I was a university student in the mid-'60s, and most people were taking LSD and everybody was doing marijuana, and it was a different feeling, though. It wasn't like trying to zone out as much as people were trying to actually figure out what was happening and what was going on. And it was more like some of the people talk about taking, what they call plant medicine, like ayahuasca and things like that, to open up their perception and get rid of preconceptions, so that they could see deeper into what's going on. I found that I really didn't need to do that because I was already in that state. So you're tuning into a news commentary show that's run by an old hippie that, feels like I just walked out of that world, and I'm looking around and saying, what's going on here? This is not normal. This is like some kind of a science fiction movie that we're in. There were characters, and we're also getting to watch it at the same time. So I'm looking at the world events with a little bit unusual perspective, I guess. But you've also always got CNN and things like that you can go back to for a sense of stability and familiarity and stuff like that, if it gets too weird for you. And a lot of people have asked me to talk about world events without being political. I'm not really sure what that means. I looked up the meaning of political in Webster, and it said it was having to do with government. And we just finished talking about government with Jeff Berwick, right, who was a guest here a little while ago. And he brought out the point that government's really not a very good idea. It's an arbitrary idea that doesn't really mean anything. He's had a lot of great guests who talk about that on his Anarchast show that you could check out. I think it's anarchast.com, but look up Anarchast in a search engine. And I totally understand and identify with the idea that we don't need every aspect of our life controlled all the time. I kind of like the idea of freedom, and I'm really into that. So I'm not a member of any political party, and I try to avoid labels completely. And if I comment about stuff that's been happening this past week, because this is a really short show, we'll be done in less than an hour. So I can't go through all the news. You guys have a lot of private, good news commentators for that are taking their cell phone out to the site of a news event and just saying, look, here's what's happening. And it's a good antidote to what's on the major corporate mainstream news. And Alex Jones has what I think is the best overall coverage and kind of comprehensive look at what's going on. He's on 6 days a week. I encourage people to look at that. And Doug has a playlist of all the current shows every day at lostartsradio.com on the right side. I think second video down gets rid of most of the commercials, and it's a good way to watch it. That's my favorite overall news source. But as far as kind of a, outside the box commentary on what's behind all of it and whether I can do that without being what people call political, and I'm pretty sure I can't do it without offending anybody. So we've already had people quit our regular show because I said something positive about Donald Trump, and that panicked a lot of people who just dropped out. But that's okay. They need to understand, from their own point of view. And I really recommend everybody be true to yourself. Don't worry about whether you agree with any other point of view that you're supposed to have. And I certainly wouldn't identify with liberal or conservative or any other label like that, because it puts blinders on your eyes. It's like the big fight going on over the Trump administration in the U.S. It's being watched all over the world, and it's a major focus of news, even though Donald Trump himself is not the news, obviously. He's just one person. But the reason that he's so much a focal point of everything now, and certainly this week, as the other weeks before, back to the election, is that there's a cartel that's in charge of things on this planet for the most part, at least on the physical level. And it's a very, very small group of individuals. And they've been working on their agendas of domination, control, and destruction for, I spent decades looking into their activities, and I traced them back first about 4,000 years and then about 15,000 years. And I know it's at least that long, probably far longer. I'm sure at this point, far longer. But really, in spite of the complexity of their vast hierarchy of control, they're really pretty simple. They are, as far as I can tell, after more than 20 years of really digging into what they're doing with us. And I mention that because it's behind a lot of the news that's happened during the week. And my job here is not to try to survey all the news events for a week in 1 hour, because I'm not going to do too well at that, but to try to draw maybe some comparisons and implications and things like that that might be worth thinking about. And so the power structure that's in charge globally and running most of the show is, you could call it satanic, and here's where a lot of people drop out. Satanic, this is conspiracy theory. No, this is really what's going on. I'm sorry, but that's what it is. It's not the label, satanic. It doesn't matter what you call it. The word's not important. But it's the worship of pain and death and destruction for its own sake. And once you really grasp that that's what's going on, a lot of the rest starts to make sense. You know, why would they be so dumb as to come up with chemical not just GMOs, but chemical agriculture in general, which is a total disaster, is not designed to feed the world, other than the naive farmers and academics that believe that. That's not where it started. In its current form, it was the brainchild of a guy named Justus von Liebig in Germany, German chemist, more than 100 years ago. And he found out that he was trying to help agriculture, right? And so he found out that if you just take nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium in a synthetic form and you put them in the soil in water soluble, the plants grow really fast. They get big. You can sell them for more. They weigh more, and everybody's happy. You don't have to worry about things like taking care of the soil. You just have soil there to hold the plant up, you know, and to be a matrix into which you put water-soluble chemicals for fertilizer. It's a really, he admitted before he died, like Pasteur about the germ theory, that he was totally wrong and that was a very bad idea. He had contributed to ruining agriculture, but it fit right into the larger agenda of the global rulers, who gobbled it right up and ignored when he corrected it, just like they ignored Pasteur when he corrected the germ theory. And you have this giant system which millions of people are following, where you pour some fertilizer on the ground, it destabilizes all the delicate microlife in the soil. Then the plants get weak and their immune systems don't work, and the insects and plant diseases, which are programmed to keep the species healthy, they move in to take out the unfit specimen so that the species can stay strong. And the chemical companies that sold you the fertilizer say, see, we told you if you don't also poison your food before you eat it, then everybody in the world is going to starve and we'll have famine and it's going to be terrible. But because we're here with the poison, we're going to save you and it's going to be great. And so that is part of a much bigger agenda. And that's why we're getting food that most of us, because there's not enough really organic food for everybody at the moment. Far from it. And so most of us are eating food that's called conventional or just no special sign on it. And when you see the sign conventional, the translation of that into actual English is poison, because they're not just the pesticides, but the chemical fertilizer destroy the value of it, and it's really a mess. And a lot of the fertilizer companies and the academic agriculture school teachers and the farmers don't understand that. They think it's all cutting edge science just like the doctors think that giving you every kind of drug and getting you on 20 different drugs chosen just for you is going to be really good. They really don't understand that this is like not just a major mistake, it's such a cataclysmic mistake that it's hard to even grasp. And that's just like one out of 20 or 30 major assaults against humanity that are not by accident, they're intentional. It's amazing that any of us are still alive on the physical level. Sorry, I keep wiping my face if that's distracting you. It's pretty hot and humid in here for Arizona today. But anyway, so what's going on in the world, if you want to kind of put it together and not just have this giant melange of disconnected events and situations and people giving their points of view and stuff, is to understand, step back and understand what's behind all of it. And it's really, you can make it a lot simpler that way to put together. And it's going to help you, because if you have a clear understanding of more of what's going on in the world, then it enables you to make better strategic decisions of how you can live your life in a way to hopefully make a contribution to making things better, which you can. And but if you just see thousands of different events and it's really hard to understand where each one fits into place, it's more difficult to get a really comprehensive overview. So I would say, for an overview of where we are now, I'm sorry, but you're in a really unusual place where you've got this satanic cartel at the top that is in control of a lot of what's going on in the world. And then you've got millions and millions of people following that power structure, having no idea where it's coming from. You know, they don't believe anything like what I just said is possible, which I don't blame them for at all. And then you've got some people who do see it to varying degrees. They understand one piece of it or another, or they've put a bunch of it together maybe, and they are actually trying to make things better. And the people that are really trying to make things better, their motivation is actually simple when you boil it down too. It's just that they want a better life and they want everybody else to also. And they've got varying degrees of understanding that we're not all separate, disconnected beings fighting over a limited amount of resources that only some of us can get. As Alex always explains, it's not a zero-sum game. That we have the capability through creativity and connecting back to where we came from to generate pretty much limitless resources in any way we want. But in order to do that, we got to get a clear picture of where we are and what's happening. So right now, if you look at the events that are unfolding in the world, one of the things that just jumps out at you that I can't talk about if I don't want to be political, but you know, I'm not coming from one point of view politically on the spectrum. I'm just looking at it. And you've got this huge, massive, organized hate campaign by almost all the major corporate media against Donald Trump and what he represents. I'm not saying he's good or bad or right or wrong or anything. I'm just observing. These are all people that have these massive resources focused on hating and, if possible, destroying Donald Trump. I mean, not just in the U.S., but all over the world. This is going on. We've got 24/7 coverage of everything he does being terrible. Donald Trump's a monster. According to the media, he is a Nazi. He hates women. He's a Russian agent. Hates poor people. Hates minorities. Pretty much anybody else that I might have forgotten. He hates women and hates homosexual and people with other kinds of sexual preferences. And I don't know, probably hates people who don't have orange hair, or who knows what. But he's just the worst person. Paul Joseph Watson recently summed it up saying, Trump is literally Hitler. That's why he's being so bad supporting Israel and doing all these other things. It's like, There's no logic to it. It's just hate. It's the energy of hate, and it's trying to inspire someone out in society to assassinate him, which they're really hoping for, or at least impeaching him because he's literally Hitler, or something like that. And if you get interested and you want to talk to somebody who believes that, they get mad really fast. I've done it quite a few times, and once you get into really detailed questions, they just start screaming in general, or they want to beat you up, or something like that. And I thought, what is this? What's causing that hysteria? Because they're not being criticized. Why are they so going crazy? Because it's so important to destroy Donald Trump. Even people who live in other countries. I mean, not everybody, but big percentage of them fall into that. And they don't, a lot of them who are viciously against him don't know why, but they know they are. And they know he's the worst thing that's ever come on the planet, incarnated here in human form, apparently human form. And when I'm looking at it, it ties together with other stories we've been covering. For example, we've been looking a lot at the 5G situation, and not just 5G, as people point out, but the 4G and the 3G and all these other Gs, which stand for generation, actually, but they're just a kind of a loose term. If you guys saw Barry Trower on Lost Arts Radio on the Sunday show, an expert in microwave weaponry, used to debrief Soviet spies for the UK in World War II. One of these people who's combined expertise with genuine care for humanity, and I really appreciate that. Those people are good teachers, and he really knows that field quite well. He came on the show many times. I do strongly recommend that you look at those archives. They're totally free. You don't have to pay money. Just watch them when you can. Go to blogtalkradio.com/LostArtsRadio, and all the archives going back years to the beginning are there. I mean, not to the dinosaurs, but the beginning of Lost Arts Radio a few years back. And the idea is that the power structure that is intending our destruction by steps, by very systematic steps, not overnight, and this is what buys us time, but by steps, is implementing a system that is sold to us for our convenience. And it's the Wi-Fi and wireless smart grid, smart meters, HARP, NexRad, all these microwave generating technologies that just happen to affect every life form on the planet in a negative way. I mean, if you go back to the movie that Josh Del Sol put out a few years ago called Take Back Your Power, which I recommend getting if you can. It's probably available for a few dollars online. Take Back Your Power by Josh Del Sol. And it was about smart meters, and at the time it was trying to get people to refuse smart meters, which were never needed for anything. The old analog conventional meters work just fine to keep track of the electric use at your house or your office, but they wanted to put in an electronically transmitting meter that just happened to be able to keep track of all your activities and when you use different appliances in your house, when you watch television, when you were home and not home, and transmit all this information back to a central source where it could be used by the utility or sold or given away to the spy agencies or to corporations, which are basically spy agencies also now. And Josh was trying to get people to understand, look, this is not a very good idea. They shouldn't be able to do this. And a lot of people did take advantage of that and refuse the smart meter installation or get it removed, because it's not just the spy aspects. It is that it's really bad for your body. Okay, so one of the main focuses of the Lost Arts Radio project is to try to give you tools for understanding and managing your own health and taking it back, because degenerative disease and infectious disease and all kinds of sickness and immunity and energy problems and stuff like that are just rampant in a complete out of control form all over the planet. And you're not supposed to understand why, because if you understand why, you could start reversing it. And it used to be just older people, like really old people like me or even older. But now it's little kids. We've had guests on recently, Dr. Tenpenny and others, that were talking about that more than half of the kids in elementary school have some kind of degenerative disease. A lot of them are on inhalers because they can't breathe normally, and a lot of them, a lot of kids are getting autism. And I think Stephanie Seneff, the PhD researcher, was saying that 1 out of 2 kids by 2030 or 2032 would have autism. So you would either have autism or be taking care of somebody that did by 2030, and that's going to be here in minutes. It's already 2018 from what I've heard, and the years are going by really fast. So the trend is total disease, total sickness all over the planet, and lowering of IQs by the use of fluoride in the water, which has, by the way, never helped tooth decay, okay? And I hope there's some dentists out there listening, because if you want to verify this, just go to the CDC website and look at what they point to where tooth decay goes down, like in the US, when they started using fluoride. Well, you take that same year and that same time and you go to a country where they did not use fluoride and you see the same drop in tooth decay. So it's a complete fraud, and it's been known to be a complete fraud since the beginning. It's a toxic waste if you don't dump it in the water supply. Look at the archive on Lost Arts Radio with Dr. Paul Connett. If you want details, he's one of the best out there for researchers. And he didn't even plan to be a researcher in fluoridation, but his wife wanted him to look at it. He was another kind of scientist, and he thought it was a silly issue, another conspiracy theory, right? But he found out, whoa, wait a minute. They're actually getting these 55-gallon drums, probably plastic because it might eat the metal, and it's got a skull and crossbones on the drum. If you drop any in the water plant on the concrete floor, it'll eat the concrete, and they're dumping it into the drinking water. Now, there's something wrong with that picture, and even if you've been believing in that the authority figures are taking good care of us and everything, and that the FDA and the EPA and the CDC are so important because they're all protecting your health and well-being, you might want to look at that a little bit closer, because they're actually in collusion with the poison companies and with the higher level rulers that are directing all this stuff. And I often say that the conspiracy theory people are completely wrong. It's much deeper and more widespread and more of a problem than they can imagine, most of them. There's some that get it. The reason that the CIA came up with the term conspiracy theory is so that the people questioning the Kennedy assassination in the 60s could be ridiculed as thinking there wasn't just Lee Harvey Oswald, there was more than one person who shot Kennedy, which Trump just gave the orders to release some of that sealed information from the fraudulent Warren Commission and make it available for people. And of course, it was completely ignored that he did that by the media. And there's still more of it, I think, to come out, which he has to reveal. But he's into doing stuff like that and showing the public what's going on. That's another reason that he's completely hated, not just by the progressives and the liberals and people who use those labels, but by many of the mainstream Republicans who feel like he's too far out of the box, rocking the boat. If they can't enjoy their bribes and perks and come out of Congress really rich, then what's the point of being in government, right? And Trump's really making a threat to that system, which he is, trying to fight against lobbying and stuff like that. So Trump's hated not because he's right about everything. That needs to be understood. There's a whole long list of complaints that I and others have about what he's doing, and especially what he's not doing. But see, that's not the issue. That is a critically important issue, but it's not the reason that he would be hated or not hated. The reason he's hated, and the reason that this has become a worldwide big issue about one man, is because he's guilty of a crime, according to the global rulers. And that crime is he wants to help his country. And people might think, oh, that's so silly, and everybody wants to help their. No, everybody doesn't want to help their country. If they get approved as a presidential candidate and the system lets them in, they have to not want to help their country in America. And I think that's true in most other countries too, almost all of them. Because if they want to help their country, they're not going to like what's happening. If they find out about agriculture's poisoning people, which it is, GMOs are just completely off the chart ridiculous. Their manufacture should never be allowed on the planet. And people who are knowingly doing that should be indicted for crimes against humanity. I personally, I told you before, I'm not into justice in the sense of wanting people to suffer for their crimes, because we've all made horrible mistakes in our life, and it's just arrogant to think that we haven't. But I want them to stop what they're doing. And the GMO thing is so blatantly a crime against humanity. They did a hamster test, which you can look up, and on the third generation, there were no more babies. Do you know what happened to a new vitamin pill if it gave people headaches? They'd probably go to prison. But these multi-billionaire companies like no longer Monsanto, it's now Bayer, so that you'll think it's nice and forget all about Monsanto. But Bayer now responsible for Monsanto because they bought them, knowing all about them. They bought them. They need to be totally exposed. And this is one of the things that Donald Trump has not done anything on. And there's so many others. He's really weak on a lot of this critical environmental stuff. But here's the key difference. It's not because he wants to destroy the country. He's proven that by other things he's done, which I can mention a few of. I mean, they're really obvious, but I'll mention a few, and you never hear them on television or from the so-called liberal people or the conventional Republicans or anybody like that. His motive is to help the country and the world by example. So if he gets the information about Bayer, for example, and finds out that pesticides are global suicide, they have never been needed. And I hope there's some pesticide salespeople listening, because I'm not saying this to attack you. A lot of the conservative people, and this is what's stupid about identifying with a label. A lot of the conservative people like to say, Rachel Carson was completely crazy. No, Rachel Carson was right. She understated the problem. The pesticides, see, and I'm telling you this so you know I'm not just against liberals. The conservatives who are looking in these narrow fields of vision are almost as crazy because it's so obvious, if you're not trying to defend a point of view, that the pesticides should never have been allowed on the planet. And they weren't needed because there are organic and beyond organic methods of making the soil so healthy that the insects and diseases that are programmed to take out the inferior specimens so that the species can stay strong, they say, oh, it's all normal. We're only going to do we're not going to damage the whole crop. We're just going to take little bits of things to keep ourselves alive so that a small population can stay in existence in case we're needed later. Most of the problems of insects and diseases go away if the soil is taken care of. And I know we're supposed to be talking about news and stuff, right? But I'm bouncing back and forth between trying to give you foundational understanding of what the meaning of the news is. So when you see Bayer and Monsanto merging, it's really not a very good sign, okay? It means that even people like Trump, who I believe has proven that his motive is completely benevolent, he would never subject himself to the kind of garbage from the media every minute without being there to try to be doing a contribution. But he really understands business, how to make business successful. He's great using that in negotiations. But what he doesn't grasp, in my opinion, just from watching him, and he can't use age as a way out of it because I'm almost as old as he is, and it's not an excuse. So he's really not seeing that when you allow a merger to go through, like Bayer and Monsanto, instead of indicting the leaders of Monsanto and killing the merger, and maybe Bayer too, depending on what they're, Bayer Crop Sciences, a division of Bayer, is involved in the GMO movement as well. And they may also be guilty of crimes that need to be brought up. And the other, Syngenta and these other companies that are involved in that same industry. I'm not wanting to condemn those people. I want to stop them from doing any more harm to the world. And a lot of the, like in South America, Brazil is really under attack. And GMOs are spreading. And indirectly, and even in places where they're banned, the effects of the GMOs are worldwide. The GMO pollen has been found pretty much all over the entire planet, remote mountains of Mexico and everywhere. This is a really bad mistake to allow any of this stuff to ever happen. And a lot of the people who identify as conservatives don't see it. And I think it's a big blind spot, brushed off as silly. And so this is something that Trump really needs to pay attention to. But he's more than proven that he's in there to help the world. And that's why he's hated. And the people who have gone along with this psychological campaign hate Trump at any cost, which is, I think, the main plank in the platform of the Democratic Party at the moment in the U.S. Hate Trump and everything else will be better after that. Talk about how terrible Trump is and on and on. It's just tiresome. But it's also not true. And it makes you think. I've told you guys about the government seal of approval, right? Like things that they demonize, like in the food world, raw milk. If they feel like it's one of the worst foods in the solar system, not pasteurized chemical milk from cows that are so abused they live 3 years and then die, are killed, sold for meat, and they're not in even good enough shape for that. No, that milk is fine. What they demonize is organic raw milk from cows that are and goats and animals that are treated as pets. So I thought, I trust the government. They would never do that unless it's a superfood. And I told you I'd offend everybody. And the vegans, most of the vegans will hate me for saying that because, the China study is flawed. Okay. And I know that's blasphemy to say that, but that's true. And the fat and cholesterol is not an enemy. It's a critical nutrient and your body makes it. And for some reason, it's something that we're short on, most of us. Anyway, that's a side issue. What I want to say is that whatever the whole power structure hates, and they spend millions of dollars of airtime on to demonize, that's probably something really good that you need to understand. And that mindset helps you a lot when you do your investigation of things. Whatever is they wouldn't bother demonizing something unless it's probably really good for you and maybe essential for your life. And conversely, they wouldn't really build something up as wonderful, for example, vaccines that we talk about with Sherry Tenpenny and others, unless it was probably deadly for you and a big danger. And, I could see all these millions of people saying, oh my God, he's killing children. He's saying vaccines are bad. What did George Orwell say? In a world of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. So the pressure is to be quiet or to go along with harmful things. But it's really not a very good thing for you to do because then you're responsible, just like an accomplice in a crime. And we don't really want to do that because our objective here is everybody's after their own well-being. And in order to have a better life and improve your situation, you have to be true to yourself and be honest and not out to hurt anybody else. This is the only way that the people working within the power structure are really not too bright. A lot of them have super high IQs. They're intellectually very fast and very bright, but they have this big area where they're below, minimal IQ, and that is that there is a deep law of nature that is built into everything. And it says whatever you do to or for anybody else intentionally comes back to you multiplied. It's the way all of us learn, and we've all made, horrible mistakes. But the thing is, once you realize that, it would be good to stop and do something opposite. So that's what it's all about. That's the only purpose in knowing the news, is not so that you can recite all the bad things happening. I mean, that's pretty much a waste of time, I'm sure you noticed. But if you can understand the patterns in what's going on in the world and strategically take that and use it to understand what you could best do to make a good contribution, then it's worth knowing about what's going on. So that's what's happening with all this, big hate campaign against Donald Trump. And the biggest fear of the people who are not reading the teleprompters, they don't know what's going on, most of them. They're just happy they're being paid massive amounts of money to look like they know what's going on, but most of them don't. But the ones at the top who are engineering this whole thing, not just the agriculture, but the drug medicine and the nuclear power and the dirty energy technology, what they're worried about with Donald Trump is that because they've analyzed that his motive is good, bad from their point of view, but good for humanity, that if he finds out about this information that I'm saying he's missing, and they're trying to keep it away from him, but if he finds out, he would probably move on it the next day. He gave an indication of his willingness to go against sacred symbols within the power structure when he, during the campaign, he said he was going to investigate vaccines. He probably got the biggest attack and the most pressure and threats on his family and everything from that compared to anything else he could have done. And that's one of my complaints, is he hasn't followed through on that. And there was a caller to Alex Jones a couple days ago who said the same thing. This is a huge failing of Donald Trump, as he should have, whether it was Robert Kennedy that he brought in or anybody else. He named Robert Kennedy just to show that he's not partisan. He wants somebody who's really serious about doing it, but he never followed through, and he needs to do that. He needs to learn about the 5G and the microwave rollout that's happening right now, because it's deadly for humanity. It even hurts insects, which we need for survival. Butterflies, birds, animals. It even hurts trees. I mean, it's a really diabolical technology, the way that it's designed right now. So all of you who are thinking how wonderful it is to have the convenience of Wi-Fi, don't fall for it, because convenience is how you're duped into doing things that are suicidal. And I don't think that's a very good trade. So Donald Trump has a huge failing. He should have stopped 5G before it started, should have reversed a lot of the other stuff, because communication technologies can easily be designed, as some of our guests on Lost Arts Radio have explained, using a different frequency that is in harmony with the frequency of the human body, which, as you probably know, is based on the Schumann resonance, which is 7.84 in a normal situation, 7.83 or 4 hertz cycles per second. Slow and healing and harmonious. And that's why it's good to walk on the ground barefoot if you can find a place that doesn't have broken glass or anything, and is not sprayed with Roundup, which is another. I mean, there's so many things that Trump should be doing if he was aware, but it's not that he's being malicious. He doesn't know. There's a lot of great people who are very intelligent who don't know about these things. They're not all evil if they don't know. It's a totally separate issue. And Roundup is something, finally, the World Health Organization was forced to admit that it probably causes cancer. They know exactly what it does. I mean, they're in business with all kinds of poison and chemical companies and drug companies and vaccine companies. CDC's making massive money off of the vaccines. And there was a great video that's on Lost Arts Radio, and I think it's from Del Bigtree, the producer of the movie Vaxxed, which you really should see. And he was showing, everybody thinks that there's, CDC has this incredible policy and procedure that keeps you safe against anything toxic coming up, like in drugs or vaccines. And there's a committee called ACIP, that's the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, I think. Of course, the word immunization is a misnomer, as Dr. Tenpenny and others have pointed out. Vaccination has nothing to do with immunization. Look at the archive, okay? It's up on Lost Arts Radio right now on the YouTube channel. Don't worry about the fact that like 2 people have seen it or whatever it is. They freeze our view counters, so it looks like nobody's interested in these things. It's not true, but go and look at what she was talking about. It's a really interesting discussion we had with her on live stream, and it's going to be on tomorrow night too on Blog Talk Radio. But she was clarifying from a medical point of view, there is no connection between vaccination and immunization. This is probably the main taboo understanding that you are never supposed to understand. But I recommend that you understand it because it would be a lot better for your kids and for you. And, the plan is by 2020, which is coming up pretty soon. It's already 2018, as I mentioned. And less than 2 years from now, they have this wonderful sounding thing that we talked about called Healthy People 2020. It's coming right up. Part of a United Nations overall agenda, part of Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, which we've had great programs on that I really think you should go see. And look at what Rosa Corey has put on YouTube. She's really great on this kind of stuff. We haven't been able to get her on yet, but hopefully eventually. And in 2020, they hope to make vaccinations mandatory for all the adults too. And you say, well, I'll just wait at my door and I won't let them do it. They're not going to do it at your house, okay? They're going to make it just for your convenience, like one of your requirements for getting a driver's license is to show that you've had your 300 required vaccines or whatever. Of course, you wouldn't be able to talk or walk at that point because your brain wouldn't work anymore. But the general idea is some requirement that you can't live without is going to have as a prerequisite to it that you can show you've had every vaccine that they think you should be injected with. And this is coming right up. And it's also connected to the movement toward a cashless society. And they want people on trackable virtual currency, like credit cards and stuff, because they just have these little requirements to be a good citizen. If you haven't been injected with all the 300 different chemicals, then you can't make a money transfer, okay? But have a nice day anyway. And that's where they're going. So one of the things that Donald Trump is doing is trying to cut down on regulations. And the people who consider themselves liberal think this is terrible in general, the ones I've talked to, and say, oh, but, we're not going to have EPA protecting us anymore because of the Nazi in power and all this stuff. They don't realize that the main thing that these agencies like EPA have been doing is finding and imprisoning people who want to collect rainwater and stuff like that. That's what Trump is trying to get rid of. So if he can balance that with making real regulations like ending the biotech companies, I think that would be a really good one. And phasing out all chemical fertilizers. So not just, starving to death, but having good care of the soil so you produce more than the chemical fertilizers ever produced, which is quite practical and just waiting to be done. Those are some of the things that should be encouraged instead of having to go to prison for collecting rainwater and that sort of thing. So Trump's doing really great stuff trying to get rid of regulations. I think that's wonderful. Whole departments should probably be dumped out of the government, which are not constitutional. And as it's going toward what Jeff Berwick was talking about, that we don't need everything controlled for us. But at the same time, and my point about that is that governments now are intimately intertwined with global corporations. And that if you just eradicate the part that's called government, then the global corporations are still there, and they act like a completely non-representative government on their own, and they just control everything by force. And that's not a very good scenario either. So I don't think there's a system of government or anything else that really works if you have people in it running it that are completely corrupted. And when you look at the news, what's going on, I mean, even in education, for example, where they're starting to, in public education and even some private education, they're starting to teach kids that things that are completely suicidal and destructive for the kids. I mean, you're having to learn that nobody knows what gender they are, that nation states are out of date and should all be abolished, that climate change means that and global warming means that you should give up all your rights and let a global government dictate every bit of your life by energy credits and stuff like that. I mean, this is what they're teaching some of what they're teaching in elementary school and the higher education too. And they are getting kids completely conditioned to whole systems of technology that are wireless, and they're leading them step by step toward actually living in virtual reality, just looking at their tablet or device more than they look at the outside world. So if you have kids in school, one of the things that many of our guests have talked about is being involved in what's happening in your local community, in the schools, the local government, things like that. Because if you're not, apparently they just attract the kind of people that want to do all kinds of destructive things, or at least they want to control you in some way, makes them feel really powerful. Because they figure if you can't do that, what's the point of being in government, right? You have to be able to boss people around and tell them what to do. So if you don't show up there, which they hope you'll be too busy to do, and actually we usually are, then they're going to go along with Agenda 21 and all these templates that are given to them to just make their life easy so they don't even have to think. And it tells them how to change the planning and zoning and all these other things. That's what ICLEI was for. That's what came out of the meeting in the 90s was that in Argentina? No, it was in Brazil, I think, Rio de Janeiro. And that was in 92, if I remember right, signed by George Herbert Walker Bush on behalf of the U.S. and a whole bunch of other countries. And they came out with a document called Agenda 21, which then the media immediately said didn't exist and was a conspiracy theory. But it's behind a lot of what you see as the movement towards cities that are completely surveilled and controlled all over the world, not just in the U.S., everywhere. And the central banks make free money available for the governments that go along with it. So they all go along with it. And the only way that I can see this being reversed is having consciousness come back to the general public, or at least a small critical mass of it. And it's really the only way that I see for us to reverse things right now. I don't think we can do it by fighting, even though they would like us to, which is a big clue that it's not a good idea. The power structure right now is trying very hard to have riots all over the cities of the world, especially in the U.S. and in Europe, and have society torn apart. And the idea is that when things get bad enough, and this is part of why they want illegal immigration to just flood into Western countries especially, is that if society gets really chaotic and nightmarish enough, then the people will ask to please have a central tyrannical authority come in and save them and bring back law and order. And I think that's a big part of the strategy. So, and in fact, all over the media, like in the U.S., they're getting rid of the term illegal immigration, and they're just calling it immigration, so that if anybody's against having these flooding in of some really nasty people, mixed in with good ones too, of course, but all illegal, just walking in and claiming asylum, it's happening all over Europe too. That's an agenda of destruction. And anybody that's against it, they say that they're against immigration, which is complete nonsense. And you have to be smart enough to see the difference. It's not being mean to children to try to have a border on your country. And I think it was Time magazine, right, that put this picture of this little girl in a dress and crying, and Donald Trump like this mean monster, because remember, he's literally Hitler, and he was looking down at her and saying, "Welcome to America." The implication was that she was separated from her parents, and so they had this big story about how he's trying to be mean to children because he just likes to do that. It turned out later that her actual parents went public and said she was never separated from her mother at all. Her mother had brought her up here without telling her father, and who was really worried about her, and brought her through all these coyotes and banditos and everything in the deserts of Mexico, risked rape and murder and everything to bring her to the U.S. illegally, but that she was never separated from her mother. It was all a complete fraud. And the major media in the U.S. is so, I guess the polite word that Donald Trump uses is they're dishonest. And it's gotten so bad that you can't take any of what they say as true now, and you've got to do your own deeper research. I recommend watching Alex Jones and a lot of the other private sources which have the government seal of approval, and Congress wants to make a special law to shut down Alex Jones. That's about as much government approval as you can possibly get. We should all aspire for that if we're trying to talk about news and things like that. The other thing that Trump is doing that makes it super obvious that he is not part of the power structure, and the reason that they want to kill him is that he's shutting down this child trafficking that's going on in all the cities. That's all over America and Europe and other places too. And it's a big business, but it's not just a business for money. It's a business that supplies the little kids that are then used for taking special pictures in situations suitable for blackmail with all the people in Congress, and even down to probably the local government level in some cases, and especially in powerful cities and things, and in corporate situations too. If you want to get promoted, then you can get all this money and power and support. Just have a few extra pictures taken, and they need a big, traffic of these kidnapped kids, which I'm sure CPS helps a lot to obtain. And we need to talk more about that too. There's a lot, medical kidnap, look that up on the internet. Very important subject that we're going to have more shows on. We had one, but we got to do more on that. We'll get some good guests. But Trump is shutting that down, and all of the corporate allies are against that, and they never talk about it on the mainstream news. It shows up in a local paper and disappears immediately. But there have been thousands of arrests, including arrests of high-level child traffickers under Trump. And even if that was his only crime in the eyes of the global rulers, that would be enough to call for his murder. And he's not there for fun. But it's not about Trump. If Trump were the only one, we would have no chance. So the only hope is that that's a brief breath of oxygen, and a whole bunch of other more awake, freedom-minded, conscious people need to arise and get into office everywhere for the same reason that he's in office, not to hurt anybody. He's also come out publicly, at least at a pro-life rally, and spoken out against abortion, which I think is a really extraordinarily good thing for him to do. And I'm not wanting to get women in trouble or do anything to hurt women at all. I really want to help and support women all over the place. But he's been brave enough to tell the truth. This is should be really obvious, you guys. The baby's not part of the mother's body, okay? The baby is the baby, whether it's born yet or not. And now it's getting harder to deny that with the new technologies. Even 4G was able to show in ultrasound the baby moving around, and And they actually show it in a Planned Parenthood. This came from a whistleblower nurse who quit there. They used that 4G technology to show the baby so they could kill it in an abortion. I shouldn't say it, him or her, because they have a sex by that time. And the baby was trying to fight off the weapon. This is really heavy duty stuff. It's not religious, and it's not liberal or conservative or progressive. It's just stupid. It's stupid or malicious not to recognize that. And this nurse was like almost throwing up, and she quit. And then she exposed what they were doing. And they've killed tens of millions of babies, mostly black, because it was intended originally by Margaret Sanger to get rid of the black weeds. That's what she said. And that was what it was for. That's this great feminist hero and close friend and model of a real, dictator in Germany in the 30s and 40s. And I'm sure you know who that is. And they were really good friends. So the German dictator didn't get his ideas of eugenics on his own. He had heroes in the UK and the US that he took it from. So Donald Trump has been the only president I remember, anyway, that came out openly at this pro-life rally and talked about that abortion is not a good idea. And there's a lot of parents wanting to adopt, would-be parents, wanting to adopt babies now, and there's going to be a lot more thanks to the genetic engineering of the crops that are causing sterility and infertility, and thanks to the geoengineering that is going on, and thanks to the fluoride in the water and the poison in your food. And there's more interest in organic agriculture now, but not enough. But I was going to say there's lots of people that will adopt babies. So if you're pregnant, I would not fall for the so-called liberal stuff that, in fact, I got to hurry up and finish now. Our time's up. But Netflix had this big series that Alex put on his InfoWars website, where Netflix is having a celebration of abortion, and it's really sick, and you might want to see it for kind of a dark humor type thing, and they talk about it. They don't make believe it's a fetus or some bunch of cells or something. They say, kick that baby out of there, get your freedom back and all this. Well, I'm totally pro-choice, but I'm saying that if you don't want to spend 20 or more years or maybe your whole life being completely responsible for the baby, earning the money, taking care of it, being a good mother and father, don't have sex. That's your choice. I'm pro-choice, okay? So you do have a choice. And if you have blown it, then you're responsible. And if you're carrying a baby in your arms and you throw it on the ground and say, well, that was just part of my body, actually it wasn't. So there are some things here that, we just have to try to do a good job with, and that's one of them. But that's why Trump is hated. And so I would say, support him and get him the information on all the things that he's missing about the chemical. Geoengineering is a huge one. If Trump would learn about that, I don't think he knows about it. But if he learns about it, if there's any way that he could find out how to shut it down, there might not be a way to do it. But I'd like to see it tried. Maybe he is trying behind the scenes. He may have so many threats against his family that there's some of the stuff he cannot talk about. But those are the faults that I see that I want him to go after. And the same thing with the leaders in Europe. Some of the Eastern European leaders are arising that are freedom-oriented candidates, and office holder like Salvini in Italy looks really good. He's saying that he's risking his life and saying that the 10 required vaccines in Italy are not only unnecessary, but they're harmful and dangerous, and they don't prevent disease. Way to go, Salvini. That was great. I wish you would come on our show sometime. We've got our contacts in Italy are trying to reach him right now, and I think he would be great to have on. I have such appreciation for people like that. It's politically incorrect, and you just tell the truth. It's a revolutionary act, like George Orwell said. So it doesn't tell you what to do with all this, but I'd say on this first level of understanding, which is what's going on among the political rulers and why, and how it's all incredibly deeply coordinated with the global corporations that are actually tied in with incorporated divisions of government all over the place. First step, and I think Jeff Berwick would even agree with this, even though he's an anarchist, is that wiping out government overnight is not necessarily desirable. There's a lot of chaos that would be caused. So a step that could be done instead right away, and G. Edward Griffin has talked about this with his Freedom Force movement, trying to get good people into political office and community office and stuff. And he's going to be on the show soon, by the way, G. Edward Griffin, so watch for that on the Sunday show. And get good people into office. I know none of us have time, but one of the things we have to do, and this is a much longer discussion, and we're late now. I got to get ready for the club meeting in half an hour or less, 27 minutes. But we need to get over the old, thousands of years old religious programming that says money is evil. Getting what you want is evil. You're evil. Everything's evil except obeying our orders, right? Saying the talking points of the conservatives or the talking points of the liberal progressives, or all that stuff's gone.
Okay, hang on, everybody. I think we lost Richard. I'll try and get him back.
Are we still on, Di? Okay, yeah, I don't know what happened. I'm trying to wrap up, you guys. I know we're late, and we need to start connecting money with good projects and people with good intent. There's nothing evil about money at all. There never was. That was a complete nonsense lie. And the conventional religious authorities wanted to say, well, money's evil, but we'll take care of it for you. Just give us your money and property and you can go to heaven, and your relatives and ancestors can go to heaven. It's going to be great. No, money is good potentially if you use it for good. So once we start connecting it to that, we also need to get good people into positions of power. Power's not bad. It's just how it's used. So all that starts with working on yourself. If you're a mess internally, when most of us start out from there, you got to fix that first before you can expect any good results from your outer projects and causes and stuff like that. You're carrying around hatred. You can work for the best cause in the universe, and you're going to engender more hatred. So where you start is on yourself. I got to get ready for the club meeting at the top of the hour. If anybody's interested in that, lostartsradio.com/club, and I'll see you there. And thanks for being with us. I really appreciate you. Hope you have a wonderful week. And remember tomorrow night's show, Sherry Tenpenny at blogtalkradio.com/lostartsradio, 6 o'clock Pacific, 9 o'clock Eastern. And otherwise, I'll see you back here next week. Talk to you then.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next week.